Okay, we're going to be working in lesson 8.7 today, which we've already looked at 8.7. That's when we were working on difference of squares. And now we're going to pick up the second part of 8.7, which is called a perfect square. So we've got a couple review problems here just to kind of remind ourselves from the last chapter what that squared means. So keep in mind that that squared means that we are going to write it out twice. So we've got a plus b times a plus b. Now you're going to go ahead and FOIL this out and get a squared plus ab plus ab and then plus b squared. So now when I combine my middles here, I'm going to get a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at number 2, and then I'm going to kind of talk a little bit more about what a perfect square is and give you all the details there. But just a reminder, if it's squared, right, it means write it out twice. So I've got a minus b times a minus b. All right, so now I go ahead and FOIL. So a times a is a squared. A times b is negative ab. Negative ab. And then a negative b times a negative b is a positive b squared. Okay, and again, I'm going to combine like terms in the middle and get a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. Okay, now we did this because I kind of want to show you here. If you look at both of your answers on this, they're exactly the same. Okay, so I've got an a squared, I've got an a squared here, I got a b squared, b squared. The only difference is right here in the middles. All right, this is a plus 2ab, where this is a negative 2ab. Okay, so now we know that right now I'm going to be giving you this, and you're going to supposed to be coming up with this answer up here. Okay, so how do I know it's a perfect square? What is a perfect square? Okay, so when I'm looking at this, what I'm looking for a perfect square is there's a couple things. I'm looking for, can I square root the first and the last part? Okay, so can I square root this guy and can I square root this guy? And the answer is yes. Okay, kind of like a difference of squares a little bit. So the square root of this would be a, the square root of this would be b. Okay, and then for a perfect square, the rule of thumb is that we just have to double the middle. That's why we see a 2 there. So when I say double the middle, we're actually going to take the a, the b, and multiply by 2. So we're going to take a times b times 2. And that should get you this middle. That's what makes it a perfect square. Okay, so now over here, it's the exact same thing if it would have a negative in it. It's just when we've got a negative, you're going to stick a negative right here in the middle. All right, so if you got a negative here, you're going to have a negative there. Same thing over here. If you have a positive here, guess what? You're going to have a positive up here. Okay, so let's go ahead and write down a couple of the rules here. Okay, first off, we need to be able to square root both a and c, right? The first and the last term. Then once we know that those are square rootable, we're going to take a times b and we're going to multiply it by 2. So we're going to double it to get the middle. Okay, and so what this is going to do is this is going to help us kind of shortcut some of our factoring. So in the last lesson, I taught you how to start your list. We did 1 times 4, 2 times 2, and then out here we did 1 times 9 and 3 times 3. And then if you remember, we did the outsides and the insides, right? And tried to see, does that get me 12? And so kind of with that thought process in mind, if I look here, 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 3 is 6. And so that gets me a 12. Yay. And so then we would write down our factors, right? This would be a 2y and a 2y. Those are your front ones. And then we would have a 3 and 3 on the back side, or the back part of your factors. And then since we know it's all positives, we know we're going to have positives down here. So you'll see here that the result ended up being the exact same thing twice, okay? And so when it's the exact same thing twice, it's called a perfect square, okay? So the other way you could write your answer would be 2y plus 3 squared. We know that those are the same thing because this squared means write it out twice. Okay, so now what I'm trying to teach you a little bit here is maybe a little bit of shortcut. Instead of having to always make these lists, and there's nothing wrong with making a list, but sometimes we know how big those numbers can get, and so making a list can be a little daunting. Okay, so what I want you to kind of start looking for, and it won't happen often, but it does happen sometimes, and it'll save you some time, is you're going to check, can you square root and can you square root? Well, yeah, the square root of this is 2y. The square root of this is 3. Now come down here and look at your answer. 2y and 3. We already know all our signs are addition, so we got the plus sign. And so then the check here is to make sure that we have two of the same thing. Well, to do that, I'm going to take 2y times the 3, and then I'm going to double it. And does that give me 12? Well, 2 times 3 times 2 is 12. So yes, it does. Okay, so what I'm going to try to show you here is we are going to bypass all of this and be able just to go straight to your answer. All right, so let's look at another example here. Okay, so now on this one again, here's what we're checking for. Can you square root? Can you square root? So if you say yes, that's fabulous. So we've got a 3x. We've got the square root of 4 is 2. Okay, so that's the first step. Now, take it and multiply the 3x times the 2 times the 2, right? We've got to have a second 2 there. Okay, so now if I take 3x times 2 times 2, does that get you a 6? Not so much. Okay, so this is not I'm just going to put PS for perfect square. Okay, not a perfect square. Now, does that mean you're done? Unfortunately, no. So if it's not a perfect square, guess what, gang? You are stuck doing 1 times 9 and then 3 times 3. You're going to do 1 times 4 and 2 times 2. And then you're going to start your inside outsides until you find something that gives you a 6. Well, in this case, you're never going to find anything, and it's going to end up being prime. Okay? But a good clue sometimes is that this doesn't work. Chances are some of this down here won't work, but you got to still check and make sure. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Okay, so again, we're looking for the square roots of the first and last term, okay, or our A and our C part, right? So I'm going to square root both parts here. I've got A, I've got 6, right? So the square root of A times 6, and then times the 2, does that get you a 12A? Well, yeah, A, 6 times 2 is 12. So yeah, that works out. So yay, this is a perfect square. So that means I know I have 2 of the same factor. The square root of A is A. The square root of 36 is 6. Okay, again, you're just going to use whatever you came up with up here. Then that's what goes down here. And then your signs, well, took a look right there. Whatever that sign is what you need to be putting down into here. So it's going to be A minus 6 squared, or you could write A minus 6 times A minus 6. Okay. All right, so let's look at what happens if it's got a double variable in it. So we're going to go ahead and still do the same thing. We're still square rooting and we're still square rooting. So the square root here is a 2x. The square root here is a 9y. Okay, and then again, we're multiplying by 2 to make sure that we get that middle part right there. So 2 times 9 is 18, times 2 is 36. So yeah, that's looking pretty good. So my factors, okay, again, will be the 2x and the 9y. We know that there's going to be 2 of them. And then look at your signs. Well, all positives means it's positive. Okay, all right, let's go over the next page here. Okay, so now as always, our first step is always to pull a GCF. So in this case, make sure you pull that 2 first, because if you think about it right away, you can't square root these. So perfect square is kind of out the door right away if you can't square root. Okay, but I can pull a 2 out. So then I get 25r squared minus 60r plus 36. Okay, now I double check. Can I square root? Yep, so I get a 5r. Can I square root? Yep, I get a 6. And then if I multiply all that by 2, will that get me 60? Well, 5 times 6 is 30, times 2 is 60. So yeah, that works. So again, utilize these guys right here, 5r and the 6, right? So I'm going to have 5r minus, again, look at that sign right there, minus 6. I know there's 2 of the same factor, and then don't forget your GCF has to drop in. And that's going to be your answer. Okay. All right. So now on this guy, we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull a GCF because they're all even. So I know a 2's coming out. And so then I got to think, will 4 come out? No, not in this case. So I'm just going to do 2 and get 2a squared plus 10a plus 25. Now, when I'm looking at this for perfect square, unfortunately, I cannot square root this guy. So this is not a perfect square. So then you have to do your list. 1 times 2, 1 times 25, and 5 times 5. And double check, is there a way to get a 10 out? Well, I know the 1 and 25 won't work. That's way too high. So then my other option is 5 and 10. That's not going to work. So that's out. Okay, so then I remember I flip my list and do 2 times 1. And 2 times 25, definitely way too big. And then here, I'm getting the exact same thing again. I'm getting a 5 and a 10, so it's no good. So then your answer, right, would be all the way back here at this point, because it's not a perfect square. You can't factor it any farther, but you did change it because you pulled a GCF. Okay? All right. So now it says find the side lengths of a square given the area. Okay, so now just keep in mind on a square, right? If we're thinking of square, we know that they're going to be exactly the same on both sides. So if this is x, this would be x, right? So it's two of the exact same thing. So what I want you to do is take a second and pause the video and see if you can factor this. Okay, so you should have checked, can I square root and can I square root? And so I'll get 10r and 11. Now keep in mind, there is no GCF here, so you still have to check for GCF first. Okay, so I take 10r times 11 times 2, and does that get me 220? Yes, it sure does. Okay, so now your final answer will be 10r minus, because it's the sign right there in the middle, right? Minus 11, and there are 2 of them. Okay. All right, and then since it said the find side length, we actually are just going to say 10r minus 11 because it just wants to know one of the sides. It doesn't actually want to know both of them, okay? And then make sure we're labeling centimeters. All right, that concludes your perfect square notes for lesson 8-7.